Vou ler as perguntas em inglês e algumas são colocações, outras são perguntas mais diretas para algum dos palestrantes. Eu vou situando cada caso. Essa primeira pergunta é mais geral, então se alguém se sentir mais à vontade ou com uma interface mais direta com a temática, por favor, sinalize, senão a gente também pode, né, direcionar para a mesa. Começa então a citação. A question for everyone. We are thinking to have a 100 model at our CDOC Summary School. The audience is normally museum documentation young professionals. Where we do like to introduce some of these topics and change practices. If you need to put up such a model, what's the issues that the introductory model can't miss? So this is about education and documentation, which remains the chat, which was what Fernando from Colombia was asking about. What kind of issues and matters around what we are discussing cannot be missed by the formation, the training of the professionals of the future? Anyone? Maybe Lina, which started the conversation, or Ananda that has done the sign-off.
Gracias. Ananda había también quería, pero quizás yo puedo, con la experiencia de no trabajar directamente con el registro, pero sí en los tiempos que llevo la práctica, digamos, con alumnos, lo que me parece muy interesante, que tuve una experiencia en el Museo de Cañete, es un museo mapuche, en que se trabajó el registro de textiles, pero se invitó a los artesanos, porque muchas veces nosotros como historiadores del arte o historiadores o arqueólogos registramos objetos, pero no conocemos el sentido que tienen, lo registramos como físicamente. Y yo pienso que alternar o tener quizás la ocasión de poder también trabajar ciertos grupos de objetos desde el punto de vista no europeo, digamos, occidental, sino desde el punto de vista de ellos, me parece interesante de tomar en cuenta en la enseñanza para los alumnos, para los estudiantes.
Muchas gracias, Lina. Ananda, feel comfortable?
I think, oh, hello, sorry. I think that for me, I've got loads of these because I really think it needs dealing with. And we're watching in this country a lot of young and really quite inexperienced and non-specialist people given the job in a low paid way of doing masses of documentation because the pressure is always on to digitize. And you do the tombstone data and you bung it out, and that's actually distorted my entire career. So there's a couple of things I would say. One is digitization is not everything. The cataloging is a substantial thing. The image is information and work from the object, and also that it's not neutral, that you're not neutral, that the museum's not neutral, that the systems you're working in are not neutral. And I think that until students or even oh, I'm sorry, I've just seen Mike's got to leave for a fire alarm. I think that there's a lot of people thinking that if they learn, for example, spectrum, they have all the answers. And spectrum's one thing, and it needs a lot of work and needs contesting. And I think that contextualizing and understanding that it's made up. I mean, don't tell anyone, but the whole thing is made up essentially, and therefore you don't need to live and die by it. So it's not written in stone. So sorry, critical. Start critically. That's what I'm saying.
Perfect, Ananda. Is actually that we need some critical perspective on this part of the museological job. Thank you very much for all your presence on this. So let's go further to the next question. Mike had to go, so let's keep with the team. The second question is also for everyone. So reading it. Another question for everyone. Can we add other voices completely different from ours with our current classification systems? can we apply them to the Aboriginal knowledge or to Coke African nation culture and knowledge? So I will repeat. Can we add other voices completely different from ours, with our current classification systems?
No. Sorry, I really struggle with this because I think databases are increasingly defunct and limiting. And we definitely have the technology out there to do something different, but the systems in which we work actually are very bad at multiple narratives and represent. They can't even do our own multiple narratives. You know, we overwrite curatorial description, it disappears digitally. There's actually, it's easier in analog and paper and history files and object archives to have multiple voices because you can have all the letters, for example. But there are very few systems in which that material is actually available. I mean, I wish Mike were here because his entire book is about this, about joining things up. So the answer is Mike, and read his book. So in his absence, I can say that.
There is something very related to Mike, so I will go to the next one. How far can digitization in more orthodox institutions build bridge of knowledge and even alter and or unveil new meanings for archives and collections? Otherwise, how does the change in the mindset of curators and managers of collections occurs in that sense? I will do it again. How far can digitization in more orthodox institutions build bridge of knowledge and even alter and or unveil new meanings for archives and collections? Otherwise, how does the change in the mindset of curators and managers of collections occurs in that sense? And it's just a part of the question. I will go following it in the next, if anyone wants to comment now, or I can go. It's really about Ananda's positioning, so maybe.
Sorry, I think, sorry, I don't want to be the one to talk all the time. Somebody else say something.
We have more questions. Go for the.
Okay,
that's
okay.
how we talk with you guys.
I think I didn't get this until I worked with somebody called JC Nyala, who worked at the Horniman and has done a really wonderful project called Rethinking and Restoring Trust in African Collections. And she talks very brilliantly about changing the model of it, museums not being a destination, but a jumping off point. And she works with originating source communities, and her perspective, and you can read it all if you look up on the Horniman. When I stop talking, which maybe never, I can put the links in the chat, but it is about trust, and I think that Mike could also talk to this, but it is about putting aside your ego, your authority, your gatekeeping behaviors, your ownership, and saying, oh yeah, this is your stuff, we're really privileged, I want to hear what you know, and also to let go of research agendas, because we have a cycle of research for research's sake almost, because that's what we as curators are interested in. You know, I would spend my life looking at 18th century English chairs if I could, but nobody else is that interested, and I can't get a job just doing that. But you know, that a lot of curators do have those roles, they're very lucky, and they pursue research interests that may be their expertise, but they're never asking who is this for, because it is basically for them. And I think that's a really strong, pervasive curatorial behavior that needs to be avoided. You know, just because I'm interested in something doesn't necessarily mean everybody else is. And I don't mean do things by opinion poll, but I mean put your ego aside and your interests aside and be a librarian rather than a sort of prison warder for your collections. So hope that answers it.
Great, Ananda. It's really like that. We are I heard some concept like curatorism and practice that is always putting the objects in boxes, not sharing it in networks. And it's about the next question, which is part from the same one, but I shared it, split it in two. And maybe this is more connected with the work in Portugal. Do you believe in the shared management of collaboration through an external form to these institutions? Let's say, a reverse flow from the outside to the inside because of information technology that might allow us this today? I will complement with some positioning about the Portuguese case in specific. Do you believe that international collaboration could help to identify and evaluate those objects and rebuild those histories? How can we do it from outside to inside? How can institutions open their collections to fabric, to create documentation in between, with, together, another researcher from the based territories or original communities, how it can be implemented, how to start? I understand your tool as a very good beginning. If the next step, how can we go further from the mapping of the situation?
Okay, concerning the case of Portugal, you're saying, Leno?
Maybe you can go from this object, but if you want to share with us more wide views, feel comfortable.
Okay, in the case of Portugal, I think it's extremely needed, this sort of collaboration, because many of the collections of non-European collections, mostly ethnographic collections, we don't have many specialists in Portugal about these types of collections and these objects, because we stopped the colonization very lately in the 70s, in the middle 70s, though it was a very important step for the new Portuguese administration to cut with this past. And so many of the institutions that were related with those sort of studies were considered colonial. Many scientifics, old scientists were related with the Portuguese Estado Novo. And so it became a cut with this past. And in long time, people don't want to study this type of collections. They don't want to enter in this place. And so it's complicated because it opened a gap in this period. And it's only now that people want to recover, want to study, want to know more about these collections, and many of the people don't know how to work with that. David could talk better about this situation because he worked in one of the important museum, the National Museum of Natural History and Science of the University of Lisbon, and he could talk better about this subject if you want.
Yeah, I can, and I can. Eu vou responder até em português, que é mais fácil neste caso. Obviamente que há muito para fazer em Portugal, mas respondendo diretamente à pergunta, já há muito bons exemplos de como esse trabalho colaborativo multidisciplinar e que junta todas as vozes de especialistas, portanto, europeus, portugueses, locais, dos locais de origem dessas coleções e das próprias comunidades residentes e descendentes das comunidades que vivem nesses territórios, pode ser muito produtivo. Há uns anos atrás, e precisamente na altura em que trabalhei no Museu de História Natural, tivemos um projeto em torno daquele que é uma coleção de cerca de 2000 desenhos produzidos no século XVIII por portugueses em explorações, portanto em Moçambique, em Angola, em Cabo Verde e no Brasil, obviamente, e alguns até na antiga Índia Portuguesa, muito poucos. São cerca de 2000 desenhos que fazem registros, portanto, da fauna, da flora, também de muitos elementos etnográficos dessas regiões, grosso modo entre 1775 e 1798. E o que aconteceu é que o projeto reuniu 33 investigadores do mundo inteiro, portanto, portugueses, brasileiros, moçambicanos, angolanos, pessoas da Índia, mas também de outros países, especialistas em múltiplas áreas de saber, desde os textos que já foram aqui falados, à botânica, à zoologia, etc. E isso para a identificação e o estudo desses desenhos. E essa perspectiva multidisciplinar e também colaborativa e de olhar cruzada foi complementada também por a participação das próprias comunidades. E como é que isso foi feito? Através de plataformas de ciência cidadã, em que se disponibilizaram a totalidade dos 2000 desenhos, deram-se breves linhas de enquadramento e pediram-se, obviamente teve que se constituir uma equipa para depois analisar corretamente as respostas, mas se abriu à sociedade em geral esses desenhos e pediu-se às pessoas para as pessoas comentarem pura e simplesmente ou dizerem o que é que sabiam sobre aquele panejamento que estava representado, sobre aquela pintura cerimonial na cara daquela tribo específica de Angola brasileira, etc. E obviamente isso trouxe novas narrativas, novos olhares, permitiu também perceber permanências até aos nossos dias, determinadas práticas e determinadas realidades e determinadas produções, e eu creio que, claro que é difícil, não é? Esse tipo de projetos são difíceis de montar, mas são possíveis e trazem, hoje em dia, esses 2000 desenhos, obviamente que uma história nunca está fechada, mas creio que esses 2000 desenhos hoje em dia temos um conhecimento sobre eles e sobre aquilo que eles representam muito superior que tínhamos ao início, obviamente, mas sobretudo muito mais rico, muito mais diverso e muito mais complementar. E portanto, obviamente que é esse o caminho, não é? Nesses 3 níveis, dos 2 lados, mas também depois juntamente com a sociedade.
Perfeito, Davi. Muito obrigado pelas tuas colocações. I will get this point to go to the final question. Maybe Alexandre has a particular question on Portuguese case. I don't know if you want to ask by himself. There he is.
Yes, I don't know if Mike can hear us right now. Mike is having a fire alarm at his building. They are in Australia, so this is a very specific session at Australia. And if Mike could hear us, I guess it would be nice to have that question that Ananda answered. But my point is a very it will be interesting to hear Mike on that. If you can, if you can, Lino, ask the question again for Mike. But my question for David and Gonçalo, it's a specific question about our country, and if with the responses that you have on the survey, if any of these museums acknowledge you or inform you if they have any specific project on decolonizing museum documentation or decolonizing the information of their collections. Do you have any news about it?
I think that there is a project now called Transmat between the Santos Rocha Museum in Figueira da Foz and National Museum of Archaeology that are focused in study the collections and the provenance, etc. I don't know if it's a decolonizing perspective at all. I know that the National Museum of Ethnology finished like 2 years ago an interesting project that was called Dialogues in Diversity, was particularly focused on education that tried to involve people from minorities, Rome people, African people from the diasporas, but not so many cases. I don't know if David know any.
No, Gonçalo talks about Transmat. I know the National Museum of Natural History and Science also is trying to do some work, but not a real and properly built project around decolonizing collections and narratives. But they are trying. Actually, a few years ago, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, they had a nice exhibition about traditional buildings in São Tomé that was made in collaboration with the local communities. But
it's still an exhibition, I think.
Mudanças, maybe, I don't know.
Yes.
Well, along those 3 examples, I don't know if there is something new going on nowadays. And actually, Padrão dos Descobrimentos, as you know, without a proper collection, is doing a very good job with temporary exhibitions around those multiple narratives.
About Africa exhibition.
Yeah, Contar Africa was a very nice exhibition. That's
that I know. But it's a very nice point that you have made with Padrão of Descobrimento. This monument that we are speaking is a monument in Portugal, built by the during the period of the dictatorship, and it's a very colonial document. And the team that he's working now on that monument, they don't have a collection, but they have a very good program on decolonization, and they are discussing that with exhibitions and different kind of sessions. So David was talking about it. Thank you, David and Gonçalo, for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Alexandre. And I believe that we have more 10 minutes mostly. I will try to connect a question that was direct to Mike. I don't know if he is able to answer, but I believe that this can achieve more of the conferences, so I will read it. I would like to ask Mike Jones and all to talk more about the process of documentation in their museums regarding the relationship that they are positioning, more important, focusing in the process than the object. What can I understand is that the positioning in between the object regarding their origins is the main perspective that we are trying to work from now beyond. Is that true? Is that happening? What is happening in the contemporary documentation of the new collections that are coming in the 21st century?
I can speak a bit to this till Mike gets back to his desk.
Please.
If
Thank you very much, Ananda.
I think, I don't know, specifically in the UK, I think there's a lot of panic and a lot of anxiety about doing the wrong thing. And that's always been the case, and it's actually part of a kind of performative white fragility, which is to go, oh, it's all too difficult, and things get called, there are books called difficult collections, and if you look at what's in them, it's stuff that people have not bothered to deal with. So one of the recommendations I was talking about in subject and content is trying to get people to focus on doing not just the work of changing the words of the famous pieces with problematic language in them, but actually to look at what's been neglected in your collections, what you don't know about. And there have been a few projects, and there are several going on at places like Powell Cotton and Brighton and Ipswich museums, going into the stores. And so I think, I probably shouldn't say this in public, I think there are possibly many more Benin bronzes out there than the ones in the major collections where people have got them, because they're named, anything from African thing, really badly labeled stuff, to possession of someone. So there's not even the finding aid, even if you do the inventory, nobody's actually done the work in these things. So I think there's a lot of people going back, but the actual concentration of work I'm witnessing is displacement activities and what I would call busy work. So it's this tidying and cleaning, and actually to understand what's going on, we need to understand why the record was like that, why the language was used, why the language is still used, why somebody actually thought it was okay to put that up online as their digital offer in 2011 with language that, I mean, you can do this for all collections. Sites, you can search across racially pejorative words across almost all collections, and it's shocking what comes up. So Mike's back. I'm shutting up. Yay.
Never do that, Ananda. We really love to hear you. But
okay.
Thank you very much, Mike, to do all this effort to be with us. I hope that you are really safe there. I'm seeing you quite well, so thank you. If you want me to recover some of the questions, and some of them are regarding to your speak, so I will just recover them to bring you back to the discussion, all right?
Yes, that would be great, thank you.
Perfect. So I will go back to the second question and connect it to the fourth one. Mike, another question for everyone, specific Mike. Can we add other voices completely different from ours with our current classification systems? Can we apply them to Aboriginal knowledge or to Coke African nation culture or knowledge, for example? And I will just connect to the next one because are quite the same aspect. And I would like to ask Mike Jones to talk more about the process of documentation in a museum that consider relationship more important than objects.
Yes, thank you for that. And thank you for your patience while I had to run down 5 flights of stairs and then back up again in the building. Yes, I think these are really interesting questions, and the idea of documenting objects in itself, I think we need to step outside of the idea that we can constrain this within our existing classification systems and do it in that way. Sometimes we need to use our classification systems potentially, but then have other sets of classification systems that are entirely separate to those that might be related through in different ways. We need to get sort of beyond the idea that something can only sit in one context or one system at the same time. It can actually sit in multiple classification systems simultaneously. It's the beauty of the kind of digital system of things don't sit on a particular shelf and that's the only shelf that they can sit on. In a digital sense, they can sit in multiple contexts simultaneously, and we need to think about how to capture that effectively. But also I think to the question around documenting relationships and that being more important than objects, I think kind of 2 aspects to that question, which I saw come through on the Q&A. So I've been kind of thinking about it a bit. The first aspect of that is thinking about documentation itself and what we prioritize. So we're not just documenting discrete objects and sitting with an object and trying to capture information about that object in a set of fields in a database. We're documenting people and stories and people's relationships with objects and changing relationships to objects through time. So rethinking things like authority records. We're not just capturing provenance about donors and collectors. We're thinking about kind of networks of content related to people and place and landscape and story and history and change through time, with the object kind of woven into that context. So it's that sort of contextual weave that we need to think about including here. And that means much more complex data structures and much more involved processes of documentation and many more voices surrounding the object. And thinking about things in that way rather than just including more information in more fields in a record for the object. So documenting an object relationally is about documenting many, many things, not just documenting an object. But the other aspect to that that I want to come back to, and something that I spoke about in my talk, is that the relationships that we're talking about here aren't just documented relationships, they're interpersonal relationships, they're community relationships, they're relationships between our institutions and other groups of people. There's a really good quote that I use in my book from about Indigenous ontologies. I can share the link in the chat to this article. It's by Marissa Elena Duarte and Miranda Belade Lewis. What they say is, for non-Indigenous individuals, decolonization work means stepping back from normative expectations that all knowledge in the world can be represented in document form, to some degree already is, and Indigenous ways of knowing belong in state-funded university and government library, archive, and museum collections, especially for the benefit of society's privileged elite. So prioritizing relationships over the object in that kind of sense it might include deciding not to document something beyond what's needed potentially to manage it and a community's relationship with it. It might be being asked by a community not to document something for particular reasons and accepting that decision. It might be handing responsibility back to a community that holds the knowledge to do with it whatever they choose to do with it. We could decide not to digitize it, not to put it online, not to try and capture it in a database. And in doing those things or giving things back to a community and that authority back to a community, we shouldn't expect them to document it for themselves. That's not the purpose of that handover. There might be ways we can support people in doing that. We can build their capability in communities to document and manage things using databases and systems if that's something they want to do. But handing over that control, there shouldn't be an expectation that we'll get something back from that, or that something particular will happen, or that there will be an output that's documentation. The output is the relationship, not the documentation. So if the relationship results in documentation, then great. If it doesn't result in documentation, that's fine too. But the result is the relationship, not the documentation that we're trying to get out of these kind of processes. And I think that's what we should be kind of striving for.
Perfect, Mike. It's the best final point to our discussion. I was writing to you in the chat. Thank you very much. We have just 5 minutes mostly. So I'm wondering if anyone would like to have any questions to each other or comment on something that you thought was important or was missed in the middle of the several topics that we are crossing. Feel comfortable. And also the public, I'm closing in 2 minutes the questions button. If you need to write through the chat, feel comfortable also. And I believe that I will just call Alexandre to start the final greetings and be here to close the window at the final.
I have a little comment about this specific point that Mike brought us right now. It's that we are in a urge here at European countries to capture every bit of knowledge and every bit of information that we can use and monetize and do a lot of things around it. But we are forgetting one thing that is on our biological nature, that we must forget a lot in order to advance in many other aspects. And the memory, or the loss of memory, it's one important thing that brought us to this point. I don't know if you agree, Mike and Ananda and Lina or Gonçalo and Davina, and if you have any comments on this, but I guess that's and it's against me that because I'm a documentation person and I'd like to record
it all
everything.
in order. You want a really perfect list, don't you? You have to let that go. Yeah, no, I was laughing because I agree with that entirely, and I think that forgetting is very important. I mean, there are legal strictures around that idea on the internet now, the right to be forgotten, and I think that does fit with some of the different ontologies that Mike's articulating, that actually there is a different biological ontological lifetime for some items, and we don't need to hold all of it. And this is all, I would argue, exacerbated by digitization, this belief in the internet being completion and totality, the map of the map. Who is it? Who's the, oh, there's the quote anyway. But it's a different quote from the one that came up earlier. And I think that we should let we should let things go. But there's forgetting and there's forgetting. You know, there's the sneaky ones like us that want to keep our lists. And I think also there's a schism between knowledge and list making and management. And we're so obsessed with metrics because of digitization, because it speaks to binary, you know, noughts and ones, that trying to actually fit a variety of human experience into that is ridiculous. It's translated. So we're not creating another reality. We're not creating genuine history. It's always partial. It's always created in that moment. And I think the moment you start being transparent and saying that, it gets a little easier to let it go. You know, I think this today, I don't think it tomorrow. It's in the record. It's okay. It's an opinion. You know, these things will be caught or not caught, and they're in the land and in our bodies, and there are lots of different memories to be captured. We don't actually, I'm sorry to say it, lead a list of everything, or even to hold and we can't do it. I mean, it's ecologically unsound anyway, but it's also that way madness lies. So.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say around that from an Australian perspective is that there's quite substantial evidence that the Indigenous communities around this country have memories of sea level rise 10,000 years ago that have been passed down through stories and through communities and are maintained through to this day. And so if some of that knowledge can be maintained over 10,000 years without writing it down, then maybe we don't have to write it down either. We can hand control of that knowledge back to communities who know how to manage it in a different way.